Hey guys, welcome to the second episode. No chick flick teal pointer. We're in a very cultured place here. You can tell we're not doing coffee can or cigar box instruments. We're into the big time stuff now, or at least pretending I am. So, the last episode you saw me do some work on a 1950s vintage cello from the Mittenwald, Germany area that came out of the shop of Herman Walicki in West Los Angeles. That episode is there, right up there, right about now. And at the end of that episode, I talked a little bit about Herman, his level of expertise, and some of the instruments that came out of his shop, including one bass of Spain. So, before we get into this instrument, let's expand a little bit more on that. So, there is a great book called The Violin Hunter. And you will find in this book, there is a guy that was called Teresio. And he would go around and he would find violins that were Italian made, Stradivari, Amati, Guarneri, things like that. Those makers were world famous, and a lot of their work was commissioned by royalty. So say, for example, I was a royalty. Can you imagine that? Wouldn't that be a pain? My last name actually means Lord of the Forest. Believe that or not. My job title at work kind of means that too, but it's, yeah, so but nobody was making violins when my daughter got married and gifting them to me from the king of East Jesus, Kentucky, or whatever was going on back then. But anyway, so these people would make violins, they would sell them, and they would also give them as tithing offerings to the church. So I want you to think about this. You're making violins. Some of your violins are for people who just want a violin. Some of them have the finest accoutrements, all this fancy scroll head, looks like a lion, whatever. Again, if you're depending on me for violin information so you can go play Jeopardy, you will lose. But, so I want you to imagine that you know somebody that's a really good craftsman right now, and you don't know that 300 years from now something they made is going to be worth millions of dollars. So you think they're an old man, you learn from them, you look at it, you go, how hard can this be? Well, let me give you an idea how hard it can be. Spruce is very soft wood. It's thin, it resonates, but it doesn't just get that way. So there's finishes that are involved. I've done an episode about, it was actually about using mud and river water on a guitar and using potassium silicate and talking about transition layers and stuff. It's right up there right about now. But I want you to think about some of the secrets that these guys knew to have their instruments last hundreds of years and still sound great. But anyway, the kids back then, just like the 25-year-olds now, they know everything. They don't remember that we're still paying their cell bill, but they know everything else, including everything we should have done and even into how we will fail into the future. So I want you to imagine that Stradivari makes a cello, and somebody gets their hands on it and thinks, you know what, I could have done way better. So they pull the top off, okay, and they replace it with one they do. And the top's hanging somewhere in a store window somewhere. So here comes this Teresio guy. He figures out from one of Stradivari's daughters or granddaughters, who's a nun in the church, that a lot of these violins that her grandfather made were just laying around in rectories somewhere gathering dust because they were tithing offerings. Of course, the violins that were made by for a king to purchase a gift for the crown prince of whatever over here. That's another group. But again, remember, these violins were not seen the way we see them now. So this Teresiio guy would go around, he would do work, he was like a cabinet repair person, a wood craftsman. We'd go into the church, do some work, and trade for these violins. Then he would take them up to France, and there was a guy up there named Volmé that would get these violins because the French understood the quality of the Italian violin. So, fast forward. Imagine you are riding around in some carriage and you got Robin Hood and people like that, and you are going around and you're doing performances on your instrument for different royalty, and you got one of those French carriage buggies with the big wheels on it and people wearing buckles on their shoes with doilies for socks and all this and a feather in their hat, and you got your best violin or cello. No, so somebody figured out we can make copies of these things that are good enough to play in a concert and complement the artist and look like the original thing while the original is safe at home. I think you're going to see that some of the instruments that are made, guitars and stuff, are treasured. So you got tour grade instruments, you got the ones they go in the studio, or the ones that, the first recording of Eruption came off on. So Volmé was one of these people that could mimic instruments really well. So the south of Germany, where Mittenwald is not that far from the violin center. So you got Brescia to the north, and then you've got Cremona a little bit further south. And there's differences in those instruments, by the way. That's worth looking at if you decide to go down this path. So at the end of it, in Mittenwald, you had people that knew how to work wood. So you had cabinet makers, you had furniture makers, you had instrument makers. And it got to the point where there were so many people making copies of these instruments that you'll see these tags and it'll say Stradivari this, or, well, what those tags meant was this is a violin made in the style of a Stradivari made in this time. So every time somebody sees one of those tags, it's, oh my God, I need to go to Antiques Roadshow. But anyway, the Klotz family, K-L-O-Z, you'll see it that way in some of the early literature, even on the labels, had Matthias, and then one of his sons was Sebastian. And they were serious about quality instrument making to the point where I think they were responsible for forming a guild that said, look, and not anybody off the street is going to come in and put a Mittenwald tag on a violin and represent that they're turning out the quality that we are. So when you get into violin auction records, they're pretty easy to find. This Teresiio name is a good name to look up on the internet, and you'll find where you can look at different instruments, get pictures of them, find auction values. But Sebastian Klotz, some of his instruments are suggested to be up to $40,000 and $50,000. I think the record was $25,000 for a violin. Now you'll see some of his work is in violins and then sometimes cellos. So what I'm going to show you now that I showed you at the end of the last episode is this cello, and it came out of the Klotz workshop, and I've seen notes on this instrument from 1964, a transaction statement that listed it to be about 1720 to 1750. The person that made that judgment is very credible, and I saw that there was a transaction made with somebody in the area of West LA, which is around the Cheviot Hills Palms area. And then it came back to the shop a little over a year later, and it was bought back. Now, the amount that you saw back then, and I don't know whether it was in this condition or what the plan was, but you saw an amount of less than $1,000. But in 1964, $1,000, even $500 is $6,000 or $7,000 now. So this thing has some stuff going on with it. It's been repaired. The notes say that there's a repair tag in it from 1844. There's evidence all over that it has been repaired. It looks to be in really, really bad shape. But when I got my hands on this, you want to remember the terms are a little bit different in archtop guitars than in cellos and violins. This is the top plate, the bottom is the bottom plate, the sides are the ribs, and there's all kinds of reinforcements and things here and there. But this thing was completely dried out. The ribs or sides had separated up from the top block and were blown out, and this thing went into a case. I put sponges in. I use those as Cello sponges inside of those traveling soap holders that have the prisms on the top. You just drill holes, lay the case flat, make sure there's no string tension on the thing, and let it absorb. And then finally, just before I did the work on it recently, we were going to have 6, 8, 10 inches of rain. It went out on the covered patio where it was not going to be physically hit by the rain, but it would absorb 100% humidity for a few days. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some of the stuff I did to this cello to get it to the point where we can start looking at taking the top off. You really, like I've told you in archtops, you don't take the top and bottom off at the same time. One thing I do know is I'm always wanting to take the back off of an archtop. If you start talking about taking the back off of a violin or a cello, those guys freak out, because this thing right here, this button, if that's not there, it's a big deal. So they go right for taking the top off, which means separating the sides and everything. Now you'll see in the movie here in this episode that some of this stuff was already coming apart here, and that a lot of the top plate is already off. But we've got it at this point where it's stabilized enough, and then we'll look at taking the top off. Once that's done, we'll start talking about fixing this crack here. We'll get a good look at those labels in there, and we'll be able to go in whenever you take stuff that's dried out and pull it back in. You're going to end up with flat spots in the radius. We don't want that. So there'll be a lot of opportunities for us to cut forms and calls that will allow us to go back in, moisten things up, and we can even take some of this hide glue stuff that's not the way we want it. We can heat up the hide glue and redo things as we go. So I think that's about enough. This came from a reputable dealer. It comes from a reputable family, and the fact that I have it and I'm able to work on it, people will say, well, why do you have it? If you take this into a shop, someone will be like, you know what? Why do you have this? Who let it get like this? I don't care about any of that. The fact that I've been able to take enough junky Sears catalog archtops, Christmas guitars, and fix them enough to put them on a stage and let them be played and have another life. If that's what it took to get me to the point where I can work on the worst cello that Sebastian Klotz ever made, then I am happy. So let's go get some work done on this thing. Okay guys, before we talk about how and what we need, I think that we'll show you kind of what's going on here. The first thing, believe it or not, I put this thing out on a covered patio when it was raining in LA, when we got 5, 6, 8 inches of rain in a 24, 36 hour period. And it really rehydrated this thing. I had it in a case with sponges for several months when I got it, and so it's been trying to hydrate itself back up. When you're pressing on wood like this that has been dehydrated, you're going to get cracks everywhere, so you don't want to do that. But I want to show you here that there is a block here that the neck fits into on both sides. That there's a thin piece of wood here that we call lining. You'll find that in the finer arch tops. And then you've got this side here that's called a rib. Now there's a couple of cracks. One is here, and then you've got one that comes here and then follows the grain. This is spruce, this is maple. Sometimes maple is figured, the grain runs depending on how you cut it. So the idea here is that we need to get this back together, but we really don't want the top to be on it. But in order to take the top off without the sides collapsing and everything completely falling apart, we need some semblance of things being together. So the idea here is that we're going to go in, we're going to clean this stuff up, and we're going to glue, starting with the linings, get them back to where they go. Now there's going to be clumps of glue, there's going to be some things all over the place. So I have a number of scrapers, I have some fine sandpaper. A good rule of thumb is you don't take wood away, you add varnish or shellac if you need to. So for example, if I think that there's something stopping this from, like a piece of dust or something, stopping the lining from re-adhering to the side of the rib, then I would go in and do that, and I've got a number of clamps. So this is going to be pieces, you figure out what makes what stronger. So the top and bottom linings will go here, then we'll fix these cracks here. There are edge clamps and a number of other clamps. Again, you want to make sure, whether it's with a brush or whatever you want to use, that there's no pieces of particles or something that would get trapped down in there and would stop this from coming back together as good as it can. So we're going to try to spread this a little bit here. I think the neck is in the way on this side, but we'll put a little glue here and then clamp that and make sure that everything goes together before we pull this back in. And of course we're going to make sure that everything is glued to the bottom, and the block here, the block had glue on it. You want to get that off, you want to get this off, but everything will come back together. We'll get that solid before we try to take the top off, which is already loose in a couple places, and you'll see that here in a minute. Now over here we've got the same kind of thing. You can see that there's some space at the top right here. The top plate is trying to come off, and if you've got one of these separation knives and you put a little soap on it, you can actually put a piece of damp cloth on here and take an iron or a blow dryer. You want to remember that hide glue comes loose if it's heated up. You want to make sure, if you're using something, you've seen me use granny iron and hobo hot plate to heat these knives up, but if you're have all of this hot and you're sticking it way in here, something is in there and it gets underneath it, it will take the hide glue loose. Could be the base bar, whatever. But the whole idea is that we want to get this back in place so we can go all the way around. Got the same kind of issue here, just not as bad, but there is a piece of wood missing here, and it is not remnant to the block up here anymore. And this is going to take us being very careful with this, but you see that? That's what we want to happen. Like the other side, there are a couple cracks. There has been repair here in the past, who knows? Maybe that airplane that's going over did the repairs. But I do know that there are 2 repair tags in this, one of them being from 1744. Let's take a look at another area that concerns me. Let's learn a couple more terms. This is called the upper bout, B-O-U-T. This is called the lower bout. This is called the C bout. So there are some parts in here that are constructed this way. Again, you can see that the top is loose here. It's trying to come apart, and that's going to help us. But the problem we've got here is this C bout has its own structure, and it's got some reinforcement there. Can you see that right there? So we need to get this all put back together, and the problem here is this has come apart from itself right at this point right here. You see that? So we need to fix that first and get that gap right there pulled back into itself and glued up. Then we can line up the ribs. You can see that the ribs or the sides here are very thin. So we're going to get this all put back together. There's some clamps that are specialty clamps for this. Once this is all done, here's an example of something sticking in there. Just that little piece of wood was keeping that from being flush right there. So we're going to be very careful here. We're going to get all this blown out. So once we have all this back in line and clamped in and pulled in, then we can take the top off. And like I said, it's pretty loose all the way around. It's loose way over to here. But there's always got to be an additional problem. And this time, how are we doing on the angle here? Let's get a couple of these micro fiber cloths underneath here. Like so. Again, this is loose here. And it's starting to be loose here. I've got to cut this here like so, and there's a back block here. But once I get all that loose, this should pop off. I want you to notice that there's all kinds of cracks and separations here. And I'm going to do the best I can do to try to get that stuff together before we get the top off, but some of it's not going to be possible. So we're going to just there's going to be some patching to do. Fortunately, I think this instrument is in good enough shape, believe it or not, where we're not having to add pieces at the split of the ribs here. You see things like that happening. People change the neck diameter and whatever, and people are coming in and adding and pulling pieces out. But this is an area of concern here. And you can see from here, this instrument has been repaired numerous times in the past, and I will tell you that they're built to repair. That's why hide glue comes apart with heat. Once the top plate is off, we can go in and start taking a look at this crack right here. Has it been stabilized? I can see the bass bar that runs down like tone bars and some of the arch tops we see on both sides of the neck all the way to the bottom. But in this cello right here, that bass bar runs right there, and there seems to be a relationship with this running crack right here. So there'll be some cleaning to do and stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the tools we're going to use. All right, guys, I think I got a pretty good setup going on here. We're going to talk a little bit about the different tools and materials you're going to need. We've talked about some parting tools and knives and things like that, and palette knives. So the best thing you can do is get a piece of 600 grit and run over everything you have to keep the glue off of it and stuff like that. You want this to be nice and smooth, and you want to make sure that whatever you're using can be heated up, so in case you need to put it under a hot plate, or again, you could use an iron with fabric underneath that's moistened or something like that. Be careful of your finishes. It's the bad part about steaming a neck off. Sometimes the finish is the victim. Okay, something we're going to have to know quite a bit about here is hide glue. I'm not talking about the stuff in the bottle. We're talking about the stuff that comes in granules, like so. See that? And there are distinct ratios that you need to know about. This stuff dries really quick. You mix it, you pre-moisten it, you put a certain amount of water in it. It gets like this. You let it soak in, then you heat it up between 145 and 160, which means a thermometer like this is a good thing. You'll heat it up each time you use it. As long as it's in that temperature range, that means that it's good to go. If it's not, it's going to start to set up, it's going to gelatinize. Do not let the stuff boil. It won't be good for it. So the best thing to do is kind of estimate how much you're going to need. Mix up the appropriate batch. When you're not using this stuff, you put it back in the refrigerator. Do not let it sit out at room temperature. It will get a layer of mold on it. You do not want to introduce mold into your instrument. When it comes to applying this stuff, there are a couple things that we can use. I like this glue syringe because you can immerse it in the double boiler or the heater that you have keeping your hide glue hot. You just pull the top off like this, release this, put your hide glue in there, turn it upside down. This one has a number of tips that come with it that are really cool, and they're numbered here, different sizes. So for example, this would be great, and this one, when you put the tip on, you can just turn it in and it stays there. So if I'm injecting glue down into here, you see this? It fits right down in there. I can pull this off to the side and I can set the stream of glue that I want to come out of this. This is a really handy thing. Take the time to get hot water and clean this stuff up when you're done with a glue syringe. They also make some that are a little bit more economical. I don't know how much more economical you can get. I've used this one a ton. What else do we have here? Back to the hide glue, you just want to get your concentrations mixed up right. I'm not going to get into all that with you first time. My knives, you all have seen my knives. I'm big about keeping things organized, binding scrapers, all different kinds of things, violin maker knives, and I've got a couple of pieces of bone in here that I can use to find sand stuff if I need to. Okay, let's get some of this out of the way. Let's talk a little bit about clamps. I'm going to pop in and out of the scene here, but I've got modern clamps that are economical. They don't have to, they're not have to be in, for industrial use. They can go across the bout this way. They have some that are a little bit longer. These are all less than $10, and you can tell I'll be using this one later. Be careful using them. You don't have to crack anything. And you can use pieces of leather or softened material whenever you're clamping on the end blocks or on stuff that's cracked. I want to show you a number of clamps now. First is not a clamp, but it is an awesome thing to use. They're magnets, so you just basically take a luthier magnet. The other one has jumped onto something here. Let's see if we can find it. But they make these in sets, and you just put one back here. For example, if I'm doing this lining, I put the glue on there, and then I can just put this, and they hold to each other, which is good. And I've got a number of those. They all seem to stick together. I've got some very small clamps, like this again. which is good for something like this. Take your painter's tape, put a softener on the edge of your clamps. You can get, these are actually clothespins now. Take pieces of your old fingerboard and put these on here in a number, or you've got numerous ones. You see this one? Works great. They're padded already. If I wanted to do that, I can do that. They also have some bigger ones like that. Let's say, for example, I don't have my edge clamp. Edge clamps are cool because they'll clamp here and here, and then you can pull them together. I've got mine on another one right here, but I can take this and get this together and put those two there like that, put another clamp here. I've got some period correct clamps that are wooden screws. They'll fit on the ribs. I've got stuff like this that you can put inside of things and clamp everywhere. But even something as simple as a clothespin will work great. Have plenty of clamps. I keep them arranged in a box, and this is where this idea comes from. Put them on pieces of cut-offs, yardsticks, whatever it takes. You will want to have pieces of leather softeners. Remember, this leather has a rough side. If you clamp that down, it will be on your finish. The smooth side is what you want. This stuff works great, especially if you've got something sticking out a little further than you want it. You can take this and cut whatever you need, double them up, and then glue it, and it will use this extra height to push everything in without damaging it. So, the more advanced stuff, if you're trying to push something up into place, again, you can use this up against the finish, and this actually works like a floor jack. You can crank something up, get it into place, or down. I'll keep that in there. They always say you can never have enough clamps. Make sure your workspace is padded and that everything is set up and ready to go. Now, I'm going to get on doing some simple stuff here. I think I'll give you a couple clips here and there. We're not going to walk through, but again, this whole thing is about getting this stuff put back to the bottom. And I'll tell you this, people who work on violins and cellos and stand-up basses are going to question you every time that you talk about taking the back off. Taking the back off on one of these instruments is not desirable at all, is my experience. In fact, people that work on this kind of stuff, when it comes to arch tops, they're always the one that want to take the top off, and I avoid that like the plague. Okay, a couple of last thing, cleats. I have a box that's labeled cleats. Imagine that. You set these all in the right way on your shelving, you'll be able to find it. Some of this is ash, some of it's maple, some of it's mahogany. These are pen blanks. You can go where people turn ballpoint pens that they make by hand. You can buy these, you can set these up on a bandsaw with a fence and just and make some small ones, make plenty of them. And you just taper the edges off, you see that? Where they're highest in the middle. Sometimes if you're cleating something that is curved, you're going to do a little bit of a concave here so it sits nice and flush up against the edge, which is not always flat, especially on an arched instrument. But anyway, have this stuff ready and a bunch of them cut. Don't just cut one, cut 20 because you will use them. Next thing is, we talked a little bit about running cracks. Let's say that you can't get to a crack because you can't get through the F hole or whatever you're doing. You can take a 9 or 10 gauge guitar string. You can go down through the crack. They have these drills that are very small, and you turn them with your finger like this. You can do a little hole up here where this crack is, and then because the string is metal, you can take one of your magnets, because it seems to know that there's strings in here, you see that, and you can fish that out, and then you put this up on top. Notice that there's cork on the bottom already. You set it up here, and on the other end of the string, you push the string through this cleat the way you want it, okay? You can tape that or do whatever you need to do. And then they make these little cable clamps that they sell at the hardware store. You see, that has a hole in it, that has a screw. You tighten up the end of the string there so it does this, and it will hold the cleat. You pull the cleat up into place underneath the crack. Watch the grain. Never set your cleats, the grain of your cleat running the same way as the crack, because it will just crack. Turn it the other way, and then you simply take this. Of course, my crack repair homemade clamps have Grover Imperials. Why not? My guitars certainly aren't of the quality where you would use those, and then you just winch this up into place and pull your crack up wherever you want it. You saw me do that in the Gibson Mandel Bass episode. Link was right up there. I think I already gave you a card, but anyway, that's that. We're going to start to get to work here. I'm going to heat up my hide glue to 145. That's right. We're going to make sure that the pan that has the hot water in it that I use as a double boiler is right there. We're going to monitor the temperature constantly. I'm not going to get a lot of glue time, but that comes with the territory. If you want to have a hot plate here, that's one way of doing it, but make sure that you keep your temperature right. Do not let this stuff boil. Don't use it too cool, because you will not maximize your adhesion. The good thing about hide glue is if there's a mistake, you can heat it up. The bad part about hide glue is if you leave your instruments in the Las Vegas car and it's 122 degrees, just like in Indio, California, cultural capital of the world, your neck on your guitar can actually heat up inside the case, and then when it cools off, wherever it relaxed to, you'll do a self neck reset without even knowing it. So we're going to get our little brush out, we're going to heat up some hide glue, and we're going to start off on some of these simple repairs here, like this. And I've already got a clamp going on here to pull this back into shape. Okay, let's start here. As the hide glue is over there heating up, I can decide that I want to pull this out like so. I can clamp it there and get my work area the way I want it, exposed like that. I'm going to take a piece of 600 grit paper, and the parts that I'm going to glue, I want to make sure that there's nothing in there that's going to stop me from, could be a piece of sand, a piece of wood chip, it could be whatever it is. I want to make sure that that's not in there. I'm going to take the sandpaper, the smart side, and put it in and squeeze it just a little bit like I'm resetting a neck. We're going to do that to both sides and make sure that there's nothing in there. And then when it comes time to do the hide glue, we're going to put it in like so. And then I can take these magnets, are super cool. Make sure that you put softeners on them. Don't get your fingers between them because they're very strong. But I have a disc here that's part of one, and I can just put it there like that, and I can hold this and move that just a little bit, whatever I want to do, get it lined up, and then put a series of these clamps like so wherever I need them to be, and then let them set up before I go to the next step. Okay, we've got our hide glue over here. It's heated up, it's in the water, and it's above 145, and we're going to keep it that way. We're going to work quickly, wet our brush just a little bit, and the viscosity of our hide glue is, can you see that dripping there? Yeah, okay, here we go. I'm gonna put that here, all the way back to there. We've cleaned it up very good. We don't want it dripping everywhere, but that is that. We're gonna take one of these here. We're going to put it right there, and we're gonna clamp that. We're gonna leave enough room for a clamp there and one there. Now, this one here, I think we're gonna be able to work that okay. We'll pull that off to the side just a little bit. In fact, I think I'll replace that with this now that we're set up. And that crack goes all the way back to there. Again, we are going to make sure that there's nothing in the way. So on our sandpaper there, like so. Make sure water isn't cooling off too quickly. Yeah, we're still in the 149 range. That is good. Put that like so. These magnets are very handy. There. We can put one right where that goes. I want to make sure that is glued up good. Notice the softeners are on here. And then because the edge is right there, we can take this and clamp that like so. There's a small one down here. I think we can lower the camera just a bit. Always checking that hide glue temperature. 145. Yeah, this crack is curved. It's running with the grain is what's going on there. Okay. Pull this one around the back. Press that up. Like I said, these are handy to have here like this. And then we'll just push that up. And bingo, I think we did all that in, what, 5 minutes? And our hide glue is still fine. Clean that brush off. And we're going to let this sit for a little bit. We'll go around here and do something similar. Okay, this one here, the lining is in good shape. There's a crack right down here that we're going to be able to fix as we push this in. The only thing I'm worried about here is this is a little crumpled and whatever, and I don't want to separate this out any further than I need to. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this out as far as it wants to go. I'm going to put that clothespin in there like that. Then I'm going to take my palette knife. I'm going to put a piece of painter's tape on it. I'm going to put a piece of 600 grit paper right there like that. Reinforce it a couple times like so. So this can fit down in here on that block, and I can sand the exposed part top to bottom, because the next thing to do on this one, believe it or not, is to actually pull this in, pat it, and put a clamp on it that runs the length of the body and pull it into place, which is the same thing this side will need once all this scrap apparatus is gone. We've got that top clamp on. We're going to get the bottom one over to there. There we go. Lay that on its side, and we can see that leather there is below this edge, which it needs to be. And when this other side over here is dried up with its numerous afflictions, we will do the same thing. The important part about is where this clamping caul is, I can get this knife down in between the gap that goes between the wood here, where it's against the top plate, so the ribs are in place. And we're just going to let that dry up. All right, the big clamps are off, and we'll have a look here. This glued up nice to the head block. Everything is flush. A little bit of the top plate is sticking out as it should be, as well as the bottom, which means the leather pushed that in great. There's a piece missing right here that'll have to be replaced at some point, which just means carving it in. So the other side, we're going to have to glue the bottom of the rib to the bottom plate and make that part of the attachment here. This is pretty smooth here. There's going to be a little bit of sanding to do here where it mounts here. The block is in really good shape, but now it's time to just pull all this off, do a little bit of sanding here, put hide glue here, and on the bottom plate, the top plate is loose, and we're going to let that be. So this worked out really well. over here on the bottom of the C-bout, on the bass side, everything came together nice. There's some clamps that actually loosened off a little bit once everything tightened up. So again, this is going to be separated. The bottom is pretty secure, but before I get everything going here, I'm going to want to pull this in with a little bit of a clamp across the body and get this in the right spot. So when we do take the top off, this isn't relaxing. This is just gluing the ribs on here, and there's a crack in the rib there and there that I want to close up before I take the top off. So there's going to be a clamping to do crossways, as well as when we pull this back in to the top block. So that can all be done at once. Okay, a slight little detail I don't want to miss. It's going to delay me just a tad, but the lining on the bottom is loose, and I'm going to want to make sure that that's tight, which means running the sandpaper through there and getting this clamped up and tightened before I pull all this back into shape. Okay, this is really important. 600 grit sandpaper here, here, and along this edge. And then I inspected this part here on the head block, and there was a little piece of something right down towards the bottom, but that's clean, so everything will clean up and come together nice. Alright guys, this is not much to look at, but it's going to work. You just don't have enough hands when there's this many clamps involved, but the main thing is that we are flush down here where the ribs meet the neck and the block, and we have some glue on here which was put on earliest to keep this radius tight. And we have no new cracks, so everything is good. All right, guys, I am really happy with the way things went thus far. As old as this thing is, and as long as it sat around unattended and drying out and everything, the fact that these were up here the first time I saw it, and now that they're starting to bend back in to the way they're supposed to. There's a little bit of work to do here. There's a piece of wood missing here to get these flush. But you want to remember, when you've got something that has been out of whack for a while, that was put together by steaming the wood, a couple things are likely to happen when you try to force it back into shape. The radius will either flatten out, or you're going to have some cracks. So I'm going to wait a couple weeks to see what this thing does, because anytime you push something one way, you're going to get cracks and things. So given what this is, like I said, I am really happy about it. Now, this book I keep telling you about has a whole section on rib repairs, and that's the sides being connected to the back, or cracks or things like that. And it shows you something I'm going to be doing next is you're going to be cutting pieces of wood that match the radius, so you can go inside and push out. You can use turnbuckles, you can do any number of things. But the whole reason that we really wanted to get this thing back together, where the ribs are back in contact, full contact with the back plate, is so that we can pull the top off. And once we get in there, there's going to be a lot of cool stuff. So you want to remember, there's a preface in this book by Hans Weishar and Margaret Shipman, who was his apprentice. in the later days. And it says, this one right here, everyone is an apprentice, a journeyman is he who has acquired an ability, and a master is he whose ability has become creative. So when everybody starts slotting themselves up into, where they fit in comparison to everybody else, then they should remember that. Oh, I found one of my chick flick teal pointers. This one has no scratches and stuff, because I guess it is the orchestral chick flick teal pointer. But I've got this show catalog that came from New York for a show in 1966 that shows the bass of Spain, cello, Antonio Stradivari, made in Cremona 1713, so a little bit before this. But if you get in the back, it tells you that Herman Wolicke was the one who brought it to the show. So I am very fortunate that I have some contact with the Wolickes. Fred spent a lot of time as a young man in the shop of Herman Wolicke. In fact, he was in a playpen when he was growing up, and Mother was giving lessons, and Fred's sister has gone on to become a world famous cellist. So I think I'm going to give you another link to the NAMM, North American Music Merchants Lifetime Award that they gave to Fred Wolicke, and it kind of gives you some history about us. So I'm going to give you a link to that right up there. So I'm going to add this episode to a playlist, and we're going to follow through what happens with this. A couple takeaways here. You have to be patient. I'm glad we had all that rain here. Using hide glue, for example, if you were to try and put the top back on once we're all done here and hide glue the whole thing back on, hide glue dries too quickly and stuff. So the good thing about hide glue is I can take a heat gun or a damp cloth and an iron, and I can loosen this part up here that I'm not happy with later, and heat up little pieces and put that piece that you saw that was long and had the ends were like blocks, and there was a part that would fit here. I can actually put a clamp on and limit the movement of this when I cut the hide glue loose to whatever I want with one of those things in pieces of leather, and then get this right back down where I need it. I think the most important thing I did was I had that little tool on a palette knife that let me take some 600 grit sandpaper and go in and get everything off of this. But I hate to say this, but some of this work that I'm going to see next is as simple as some of the fixing cracks on arch tops and reinforcing a sunken arched top. So thanks for watching. Give me your comments. I know that a jump from a coffee can guitar, a license plate guitar, up to something this old is quite a jump, and not everybody's going to be interested in it. But let's just say that my abilities have progressed one cheap arch top repair at a time. Give me a like if you haven't, and I always appreciate you subscribing. Click the bell so it will tell you when my next long-winded story about fixing something that no one else wants comes to YouTube.